I'm Emily Gary, and I'm the co-director of the Center for Medieval and Early Modern Studies, or MEMS, at the University of Kent. And my other co-director, Ryan Perry, is here in the audience. Hi, Ryan. Tonight, we've got a really exciting MEMS research seminar on lockdown, and we're bringing this to you via Zoom. The theme tonight is Picturing Medieval Myths in History, Making Storyland, and Visualizing Beckett Shrine with Amy Jeffs and John Jenkins. John Jenkins received his DPhil in medieval history at Oxford, and his thesis analyzed the relationship between rural monasteries and their localities in medieval Devon. As a teaching fellow and postdoctoral research assistant at the University of York, his current research has focused on the interactions between ecclesiastical institutions and the laity, mainly in late medieval England, especially the use of shrines in England's major cathedrals. He's particularly interested in how these sites were curated to suit the needs and expectations of visitors, pilgrims, and resident communities. John has worked as a postdoctoral researcher on the AHRC-funded Pilgrimage and England's Cathedrals project, which you can see here, and he helped to shape the Beckett story, developed at the Center for the Study of Christianity and Culture at the University of York, which is funded by the AHRC and the Mercer's Company. He has been producing some extraordinary new work on the cult of Becket, too. In August, he published a book co-edited with D. Dias on pilgrimage and England's cathedrals, past, present, and future. In September, he published a major new study of the cult of Becket in London, and exactly on the 800th anniversary of the translatio of Becket's body, that is the 7th of July in 2020, he published a groundbreaking new visualization of Becket's shrine in the Journal of the British Archaeological Association, and this publication really grabbed some headlines, and we're so excited to hear more about his groundbreaking work tonight. And you can see a bit of that. Here's a preview of what we're going to learn more about. Isn't that wonderful? But first, we have Amy Jeffs, who recently completed her PhD in Cambridge in the History of Art department. Her thesis examined medieval illustrations of the legendary history of Britain and France, and she focused on a circa 1340 manuscript of histories and romance, known to many of you perhaps for its Roman de Plute. She has worked in the British Library's Department of Medieval Manuscripts with the Polonsky Project, and she has led projects working with the British Museum's medieval collections, including the Paul Mellon Center-funded Digital Pilgrim Interface, which is something I know all of my undergraduate students here tonight know and love. Please take a look at this website. It is hosted by Sketchfab, and Digital Pilgrim aids engagement with the study of medieval pilgrims badges using 3D modeling. As many of you know, there are many pilgrims badges related to the cult of Becket, and Amy has also just published a fascinating new article out with the Journal of the British Archaeological Association on Anger's broken sword, Prudentius's Psychomachia, and the iconography of Becket's martyrdom. She writes for Apollo and Country Life magazines, and you should all check out her wonderful column on cathedral saints. Amy's research interests have inspired her desire to create her own contemporary linocut and wood engraved prints of the many amazing medieval stories set in Britain's landscape. Her stunning prints can be seen on her website, and Amy's book, Storyland, A New Mythology of Britain, will be published by River Run Books in autumn of 2021. Tonight, we're so pleased to hear more about this exciting book. Over to you, Amy.
Like this through lockdown, and I have to say I'm really excited. It's so lovely seeing familiar faces and students and Emily, and the atmosphere is infectious, which is amazing considering it's completely virtual. So I'm just gonna share screen and get this going. Okay, so thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be invited to speak about picturing history and myth in relation to my current book project, Storyland, A New Mythology of Britain. So the talk is a reflection on creative engagement with the objects of our research. And so while I necessarily talk about a personal project, and therefore myself, I hope that it can also be a springboard for a more general discussion of the false dichotomy drawn between creative and academic interpretation, and the ever-increasing need for early career researchers to find new ways of marketing their skills. So I'd love to hear your thoughts at the end. And there's a fly in this room, and it's huge and annoying. And if I sort of lash out at some point, it's not because I'm angry, it's because it's nearby. So my PhD focused on, as Emily said, Egerton MS 3028, which contains 2 poems, the first of which is the relevant one here. It's Wass's Roman de Brut, which is a French verse translation of Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain. And that story is it begins with the origin myth of Britain, with this idea that Trojans came led by a man called Brutus, defeated some giants and founded Britain. And then it leads through some kings and queens, but mainly kings, names of whom you will recognize. So King Lear, Cymbeline, King Arthur among them. And in studying this manuscript, I became very interested in how illustrations interacted with the text and how they offered readers different ways of digesting the text. And Egerton has an illustration on every recto. They're very prolific, they're embedded in the narrative. And one of the obvious things it does to kind of gloss the text is incorporate contemporary heraldry. So you should know that this particular version of the Brut, this Wass's Roman de Brut, this manuscript is continued from the arrival of the Saxons all the way up to the reign of Edward III. That's unique to this manuscript, and it prays for his victory against the French king, because in those years Edward III had claimed the French throne. And I want to show you this image in particular because it shows King Arthur cutting in half the head of the governor of France, whose name is Frollo, and they are holding recognizable arms. So Arthur has the royal arms of England before they were quartered with the French fleur-de-lis, and the governor of France has the French fleur-de-lis on his shield, not the scattered fleur-de-lis that the contemporary king had, but a very similar version. And I don't think it would have been lost on a contemporary viewer that this was drawing a parallel between King Arthur and Edward III's ambitions to claim the French throne. And actually throughout the legendary kings of Britain in this book are shown carrying the royal arms of England. And within a year of it being made, or 2 years of this book being made, Edward III did officially quarter the French fleur-de-lis with the English leopards and visually claim the French throne in that way. And so in looking at this manuscript, I turned to other Brut manuscripts like Royal MS 20A2, which also has illustrations, but they function very differently, and they offer another way of approaching the text. So this contains, the text is Pierre de Langtoft's Chronicle, which has its own agenda, but is broadly a Brut narrative. And it is preceded by a cycle of illustrations, a little bit like you might see with a medieval psalter, where they have a kind of typological program of Old and New Testament scenes. Well, this has a load of pairings of moments from the Brut narrative, and they just function very interestingly. So I'm going to try and talk it through to you here. So this double-page spread shows the rise and fall of a character called Vortigern, who is a usurper, and he seizes the British throne for a number of years before the reign of King Arthur, just 2 reigns before the reign of King Arthur. And when the good King Constantine dies, he has 3 sons, one of whom is a monk called Constance. He shouldn't really take the throne because he's a monk, but Vortigern, this courtier, convinces him to do it, says he'll help him out, and the monk takes the throne, but he can't really handle it. And Vortigern invites a bunch of Picts over as mercenaries and convinces them by plying them with all sorts of generous gifts that he'd be better on the throne, and that this weak king is not giving him enough money to retain them in the court. And so they go off and they kill the monk King Constance. And so on the left here, on the verso, you have Vortigern, what I have argued in my thesis, that the lower register, the chap in blue with the stick, is Vortigern, and he is pointing up at the king, and he is talking to the Picts, who are all kind of gesturing and looking up at the image. And this is him convincing them that he would make a better king. And then in the upper register, you see that wish come true. They've gone and murdered him. So it's a very interesting scene for pairing, because it's at once an event that happens within the narrative, but also an event that's foreseen or imagined by the character of Vortigern. But then Overleaf, several years have passed, he's been a terrible king, and you see his demise, his glorious demise from the perspective of the British kings. And so in the lower register, he is, I've argued, standing between the Saxons and the Britons, who are the two threats to his life. And he's told this by the child Merlin in a prophecy. And so actually you can see in the lower margin traces of the word Saxons. And so I believe that those are the figures on the left, from our perspective, in the nice clothes. They're kind of very courtly. The Saxons are always presented as being very courtly and suave. And on his other side are two men, one knight and one young man. And so those, if you know the story, can be read as King Aurelius, or the rightful heir to the British throne, King Arthur's uncle, Aurelius Ambrosius, and a knight called Earl Eldolf, who is the sole survivor of a massacre orchestrated by the Saxons under King Vortigern, and they've come back to claim the throne. And Merlin says, you should be scared of two things. You should be scared of the Saxons, because they're going to get you, and if they don't get you, the Britons will. And in fact, flee the fire of the sons of Constantine, because they're going to burn you to death in your tower. And so there he is with his, looking a bit worried, twiddling his cloak, while above him is the image of Vortigern burning to death in his tower. So again, you've got a kind of an event and an imagined event taking place simultaneously. And so this double page spread works very cleverly and cohesively. Another spread from this sequence shows on the left the now aged Merlin with his kind of Old Testament style prophet scroll, telling Uther that he's going to disguise him as Duke Gaulois of Cornwall, so that he can sleep with the Duke's wife, who he fancies, who's met at a feast. And so you've got Uther there receiving the news. This is Uther Pendragon, who I'm sure you've all heard of. And then behind him in the tower, Igraine, looking very perturbed. And that night they will conceive King Arthur. And then on the opposite page, you have the glorious King Arthur standing there with the Virgin and Child on his shield, which is a more conventional way of representing his heraldry, standing over the 30 crowns of the 30 kingdoms that he's conquered in his reign. And then I also wanted to touch on, because if you study the illustration of history, you need to also look at the illustration of saints' lives, because they take place within history. These are not some kind of fictional aside. And I, as Emily mentioned, became interested in representations of Thomas Becket's martyrdom, and particularly this very early one from circa 1180, which shows the sword of the knight breaking on Becket's head, even though the hagiography, the textual sources, describe the sword breaking on the pavement of the cathedral, not on his head. And what I've argued in my recent article is that this is a conscious visual allusion to Anger breaking her sword on the head of Patience, which was a narrative moment and also a very famous iconography in a text called the Psychomachia by Prudentius. And it was a very famous medieval classroom text in circulation for hundreds of years that certainly the monks at Canterbury would have known, and those with whom, among whom this manuscript would have circulated, would have known. And so by showing the sword breaking on Becket's head, it's offering a way of interpreting the events of history that give them a kind of a more glorious allegorical significance. And so these are all things I was fascinated by, the different ways in which images could affect the reader's perception of the text. So towards the end of my PhD, I had been doing some lino cut, and I started illustrating Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain, partly because it had never been illustrated. Well, I knew of very few contemporary illustrations of it. In fact, I didn't really know of any. I basically figured it hadn't been illustrated since the 16th century to any great degree, and I could have a lot of fun with it. And while I'd like to say that it was a way of deepening my appreciation of the sources I was meant to be studying for my thesis. It was also wholesale procrastination, but that doesn't make it a bad thing. So I started with reading the texts closely and looking for moments of visual drama or that really captured my imagination. And one was the moment when the Trojan Brutus, great-grandson of Aeneas, has been exiled from Rome for accidentally killing his dad. And he's got a whole lot of Trojans with him, some of whom have followed him from Rome, some of whom sorry, this fly is really annoying me. Some of whom he's picked up en route. And he stops at an island where there's a deserted temple to the goddess Diana, and he makes a blood sacrifice to her and says, look, I've got all these Trojans with me. I'm lost. Where will we make our homeland? And she, in the night, her statue comes to life, and she says to him, go west to an island in the sea. It's uninhabited but for a few giants. There you will build a new Troy, and you will found a race of kings, and that race of kings will rule the whole world. And she tells him, don't worry about the giants, you'll be able to defeat them just fine. So, so for some reason on my screen, there are a whole lot of yellow lines that just appeared, and it might be just, but if you can see them too, they're not deliberate. It's not some kind of visual cue. So anyway, they get to this island, which is not yet called Britain. At this point, it's called Albion, and the giants are there. And Brutus's right-hand man, Coroneus, after they've killed all of the giants but one, wrestles that final giant, their leader, Gog-Magog, and throws him into the sea. So that was another image I was interested in creating. And again, sort of the things that you come across in your research that stick with you. Like, I was intrigued by the notion of the giant and what the giant means. I went to a lecture by Alex Bovey at Bristol, who talked about the Giants of Albion, and she's going to be publishing a book on that subject and at some point in the future. And she just really inspired me with this idea of the mutability of the concept of the giant. Is he just a really big guy, or is he sort of super naturally large? And so I wanted to use a perspectival technique here that didn't actually pin down the size of Gog-Magog. Here we've got King Bladderd, who is the father of King Lear, and he's the legendary founder of Bath. He's also in Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain. And this is showing him the moment, well, he's founded Bath, he's channeled the thermal springs into pools, he's a necromancer, and he does these amazing sort of communes with the dead, and he's got the whole of Britain practicing necromancy, and he just thinks that he's brilliant, and he's done all of these amazing things, and all he can do now to really reach his full potential is fly. And he decides he's going to fly through the upper air. And here we've got, the myth really has a lot in common with the Icarus myth. So he builds himself wings, he gets up onto the tallest building in the new Troy, which later becomes London, and he throws himself, launches himself off with his new wings, and unsurprisingly crashes down onto the roof of the temple of the sun god Apollo. So you can obviously see the resonances there with the Icarus myth. And I was interested especially in this idea that he's King Lear's dad, and King Lear certainly has some issues with parenting in later life. That's of course where Shakespeare got his narrative from. And so I put in this little figure, and maybe he's the child Lear, kind of thinking his dad's just joking because his dad can do anything, but alas, no. And here, this is just as a final example of some of the brute illustrations I've been working on, is the child Merlin guiding the building of Stonehenge. And I was really fascinated with this episode with how this little child could enable Aurelius's men to lift these giant stones and bring them from a legendary mountain in Ireland all the way to the Salisbury Plain. And the actual text says, it just goes to show that art is always more powerful than brute strength, and I think we'll quite like that sentiment. So before I jump to that one, I think what I found was that I was interested in themes of extinction and vocation and power, and these were the things that I was homing in on as I worked on these illustrations. But I also was drawing on just things that had I'd come across in my research. So when I came to illustrate Thomas Becket for the Cathedral Saints series for Country Life, I just lifted the Cotton Claudius B2 technique of the sword breaking on his head, and just really played it up, because why not just have allegorical representations of historical events? Why not just play with the probability of, so it takes you out of the fear of somebody coming along and saying, but that it actually wouldn't have done that because medieval swords were made in this particular way. No, this is about meaning. And similarly, when I wanted to illustrate Vortigern hearing how he was going to burn to death in his own tower, I sort of lifted a technique that I saw in Matthew Paris's Histoire de Saint-Edouard le Ré, a life of Edward the Confessor, or History of Edward the Confessor. It's in Cambridge University Library, where whenever Edward the Confessor is having a vision, the very strict left to right temporal flow of the visual narrative progression is broken, and he looks back and he looks right to left, and the vision will take place over his shoulder in that direction. And so I thought it was a very helpful way of illustrating moments that take place outside of time and space. So here is Vortigern imagining his downfall as he's being told it by the young Merlin. So I've just put in a video, because for those of you that aren't familiar with relief printmaking, you carve a block, you ink up the block, you put paper onto it, and you put it through a press, and then you can peel the paper off, and it is the most wonderful moment. And so this is it just having come out of the press. There's Bladderd. And those blacks are just so addictive. I mean, I'll just do that again so that you can see the technique. And I think that there were certain themes emerging. I mean, lino cut really lends itself to this kind of vague, murky past. And for illustrating myth, it was ideal. And I found myself really wanting to avoid any kind of period-specific costume or architecture, and keep this in a kind of nebulous mists of time age, which, of course, in medieval manuscripts, they show people in contemporary dress, and I wasn't going to put them in trainers and jeans. So, this was one of the reasons lino cut seemed like an ideal medium. And so I'm sort of winding up here, but as Emily mentioned, the illustrations led to a book contract. I think that they kind of helped show just how brilliant these stories are to non-specialists, and of course we all know how wonderful they are. But pictures are kind of such a direct way of communicating drama, and so it will be Storyland. This book will be a collection of short stories chronologically telling the various origin myths of Britain. And then kind of legends and historical legends all the way up to the Norman conquest of England, and they will and so in some ways what has started as an academic byproduct has become a product in and of itself, and perversely it's become my way of a really helpful way of funding my continued academic research, because I live in the middle of nowhere. And so now that I've come full circle, I realise that these pictures will invite different reading approaches, just as the medieval illustrations do, and which I studied. They're not neutral, and they carry with them my unconscious and conscious biases. So I suppose, if I'm being honest, I worry about how these pictures will be received and how my retellings of the medieval text will be treated by other academics. And I'm sure there's more I could worry about if I wanted to. And so again, it's helpful to look to the model of the medieval subject that we study. Medieval makers drew their authority, auctoritas, from the past. So here I've got an example, the Bernward column in Hildesheim Cathedral, which tells a continuous narrative story of Christ from his baptism to his entry into Jerusalem. And I'll just warn you here, if you ever go see it, it's really tempting and actually very rewarding to walk in a sort of ever-increasing spiral out from the column to try and read the whole narrative. But there is a flight of stairs down into the crypt, which if you're not careful, you can fall down. I'm just telling you that from personal experience. But anyway, the Bernvard column consciously imitates the 2nd century Trajan's column in Rome, but it adapts it for a contemporary medieval audience. The subject matter is Christian, and it would have had a cross on the top. And so, you know, being fundamentally a historian is a helpful anchor, or kind of our discipline is a pole star. The past is an inexhaustible wellspring of models to be studied and reinterpreted according to the needs of the present. And if I make sure that I offer a comprehensive further reading list alongside the images and retellings when they are published, then I hope I will keep front and centre the actual fascinating survivals of the medieval past. Thank you very much.
That's so wonderful, Amy. Thank you. We'll give a kind of emoji clap for now, but I want to hand straight over to John Jenkins, if that's okay, and we'll keep questions for the end. So John, would you please share your screen now? And we're going to hear about more ways in which we can visualize the medieval imagination today. And yeah, Amy, that was so wonderful. But yeah, I'll save my comments to the end. Over to you, John.
Okay, hopefully, yes. Okay, hopefully you can see that. There we go. Right. Oh, thank you so much for that, Amy. That was brilliant. And well, we sort of talked about how we link these things together earlier in the week. And I was going to do something slightly different, but building on Storyland, I thought, well, we've got our own website called the Beckett Story. I mean, you know, it sort of links up. And I'll be talking a lot about how we thought about the images that we produced of a very different kind and how they linked with text, how they linked with story. I want to tell you, so this is our website that we created at the Centre for the Study of Christianity and Culture at the University of York, thebecketstory.org.uk. I'll give you some background from where this came from. So in 2014, we started on a 3-year AHRC project called Pilgrimage and England's Cathedrals, Past, Present and Future, as part of which, it was an AHRC funded project. As part of this, the digital team with myself as a historian, we're going to create digital models of pilgrimage, the behaviour of pilgrims within Canterbury Cathedral. Canterbury Cathedral was one of our partner organisations on the project. The idea was that we would produce these so that the cathedral could use them in heritage interpretation, for visitor experience and engagement, while they were in the cathedral, to make sense of the historic spaces of the cathedral. We had then a follow-on project based more, or focusing more specifically on the Beckett 2020 celebrations, in which we partnered with English Heritage, the Canterbury World Heritage Site, Business Improvement District at Canterbury, Visit Kent, a lot of other heritage stakeholders within Canterbury, where we did a further digital model, which was of the city of Canterbury as it would have looked in the mid-15th century. And I'll talk about that later, but that was another output we did. And then there was a further, again, follow-on project, this time funded by the Mercers Company of London and York University, which paid for me to do a lot of research on the relationship between Thomas Becket and London, the city of his birth and where he was patron saint, and to create this website and a lot of education resources where we could host the previous outputs and also the material on Becket and London. There's also a few other things that we haven't quite cleared up from that. There's going to be a walking tour, hopefully, that I've put together. We need to sort that out, of London, that is, a walking tour of Becket and London, and a few other bits and bobs. Sorry if I keep coughing, it's not because I've got anything, it's I did some vigorous exercise in York's cold air and it seemed to have brought something up. Anyway, sorry. So what I thought I'd do is that I would effectively use the website as a framework for talking about the images that we produced, the models that we produced, and these three outputs, these three projects with their many different outputs for different audiences, both textual and visual, and showing how they link together. What I should be very clear on from the start is that this was all the way through a team effort. every now and then I see sort of, oh, you know, John Jenkins's models. I didn't make the models. I was the historian. I did the research for them, but there was a big team, and I'll name check people as we go through. But Dee Dias was the PI on all the projects as the then director of the Centre for Christianity and Culture. She stepped down recently. Kate Giles is taking over as the new director. But so I think all of these were a team effort. I do not know how to model. I'll put that I can do research, but I can't do the model. So I want to start off really with the Beckett story, as we call it, the story of Beckett's life. This is the website. If you go to it, we start off pretty simply. Who was Thomas Becket? This is all the text on the website, unless it's otherwise marked, was written by me. This is one of the things I didn't write. We nabbed it from an earlier resource that we did. This was written by Sam Riches, but it's very good. It's a straight up biography of Thomas Becket, the man, as you must present. I mean, it's a great story. It keeps on getting told. It's got a great narrative. No self-made man becomes the second most powerful man in England, falls out with the king. It ends in tragedy. If that's not a great story, how come Hilary Mantel's got 2 Booker Prizes? So we've got that told there. We were thinking of other ways to tell that as well. So just trying to be a sort of bit funky, a bit new with it. One of the things we did was create a timeline. I'm not going to really go through this. I need to move that. A timeline of just some pictures to go along with the major dates. I'm not really going to go into that. You can look at that if you want. This one, however, this story map that we made, I think is particularly interesting. So basically it is Beckett's life, and I just want to dwell on this for a little bit. It's Beckett's life from when his parents meet and move from, we said Rome, but Normandy, they move to England. If you click through it, it shows where all the major events of his life took place. So you get an idea of the movement of Becket. You get a visualization. I think this is really key. Maps are so important to history. This is really key. You get an idea of just how much he traveled. So he's become a clerk in Theobald's household, and he's straight over to Bologna, Auxerre, Reims. He's moving about France and Italy, all before he becomes Chancellor. And you get an idea of, again, the cross-channel nature of his life as well. I mean, I just think this is a really interesting, really useful teaching tool in a way, because it's so, you sort of forget where a lot of these places are, and he bobbles around England for a bit. But when he moves over to France, I mean, you get an idea of the sort of region of France that he's exiled in. He's been exiled now, and he just sort of bobbles around this area, sort of southwest of Paris. Moves over there. I'm not going to, well, you can click on that as you like. But I just think, again, that sort of visual way, quite simple, of presenting that information, it does really sort of bring a new take to it. Now, one of the things, of course, when we're talking about the Becket story, a lot of people think, well, that's the life of Thomas Becket. The life of Thomas Becket, as I said, has been rewritten. I've got in front of me, I just picked up a couple of the biographies. This is Frank Barlow's, the last line of the blurb. His purpose is to establish the facts, presenting them in their true historical setting. Very admirable. John Guy's separates truth from centuries of myth-making. In the blurb, again, very admirable. That's what historians do. But actually, the myths, as Amy's been saying, are often much more fun. The myths are often what were believed, or even if they weren't believed, they're the things that inspired art. They're the things that inspired a lot of the literature. They're the things that the stories that people told each other about Becket. And that's what we wanted to do in this website, was talk about not just the life, but the death, the influence, the afterlife. So I'm just going to very quickly click on Becket in London, because I know you want to see the models, and I mean, they are the most exciting things, but I just wanted to, this interactive map would be good, but it's very temperamental, and it's not decided not to work today, so I'm not going to look at that. But looking at the themes, I mean, I think one of the most compelling stories in Becket, and it's the one that starts in Becket's life, is something that wasn't true, which is the idea that his mother was a Middle Eastern princess. Which I have argued in my article on Becket in London, arose in about 1240 in London. So it's a London-based story to give that birth in London a bit more oomph. It comes out quite late, so actually it's not the kind of thing that is necessarily readily accepted in all the Becket in all the subsequent Becket hagiography. You have the option, effectively, if you're John Grandison writing a life of Becket in the mid-14th century, you can start off his life by saying, well, I mean, he actually doesn't mention his mother, but that his parents are quite bland and Norman. But if you're writing, you know, if you're something is legendary, or if you're putting on a later medieval pageant, and later medieval pageants invariably start with this far more exciting fairy story of Becket's mother being the Saracen princess, and that's what the art is all about. That is what the art is drawn of, is of Becket's mother being a Middle Eastern princess. There she is, Queen Mary Salter, with a young Becket having just been born. So one of the things we want to do with this website, again, is bring out the myth, bring out the interesting, the powerful legends, and explain why Becket was so popular throughout the medieval period, what kept him in the popular imagination. And a lot of that is not the facts of his life, it's the myths that grew up around him. Now, I'm going to move on to our, because I want to have lots of time to talk about them, I'm going to move on to the models that we did. And I'm going to start actually with the one we did second. So on our website, we can go to Becket in Canterbury. Here's a little section of it, the city in 1450. What we wanted to show was the experience of visiting Canterbury in the later Middle Ages as a pilgrim. And there are lots of difficulties of doing that with digital modelling. We start actually not with a digital model at all. So again, all this text is my text here, and we commissioned an artist, Dominic Andrews, to do this sort of medievally style map as a sort of gateway in, to give you an idea of the overlay in a way that as a sort of casual viewer you might think, oh well, that looks sort of vaguely medievally, to get you in the mindset before we hit you with the sort of more photorealistic stuff. In all of these pages, we've gone with, I've written out sort of a bit of explanation, you've got some glossing of important or otherwise difficult words, and we try to put everywhere primary text as well. So the images are sort of glossing the text in the same way that Amy was talking about, really. That's what we tried to go for. Arriving at Canterbury. So I am going to write an article on these images of the city. It just they take forever writing articles about digital models, because the amount of work that goes into them, you've only got so much space, and you also have to spend quite a lot of time talking about the ethics of digital modeling, because that's what's expected in a digital modeling article. So this is the first image that we've taken from our digital model, Canterbury in 1450. We'll talk a bit more about the model. I just want to sort of explain what you're looking at. If you came as a casual visitor, what you can see, we talk about, is here is the West Gate over here. You come in and here is that main pilgrim access going down the High Street, down the Parade, and up Mercer Street to the Bull Stake through Christchurch Gate. You can see that L-shaped pilgrim route into the city, up into the cathedral here, and that's a nice angle that we've taken. That's not actually the angle that we model there, well, not the main angle that we take everything from. We just put it in there to show you that route. We can, the beauty of a digital model, I will show you the big one, but the beauty of a digital model, you can just sort of cut bits out of it. You can zoom in, there's the Westgate. You can change the angles a bit, so you've got an angle showing here is the Chequer of the Hope, the Bull Stakes here, so we can just pop the camera a little bit higher, get you to see that street quite nicely, or we can just pop the camera in the Bull Stake and you can look up at the cathedral. This is Christchurch Gate. The Christchurch, so we picked a date of 1450. I'll explain why in a little bit, but we picked the date of 1450, so the current Christchurch Gate wasn't built. This one, there's somewhere in an article it says the previous one probably looked like this one at Gloucester, so we used the one at Gloucester and just popped it in there. This is the Sun Inn being built. But you get that nice view up at the cathedral, so the pilgrim's view before they go into the cathedral. We wanted to get that idea of, again, the ground up. This isn't an architect's drawing. We wanted to get some kind of way of showing how you'd experience the medieval city even if it's sort of empty, as it were. Now I'm going to hopefully just pop, yes. So what I'll do is I'll pop up the main thing and I'll talk about this for a little bit. We put together this map of the city, this digital model of the city, for a couple of reasons. We'd already done the shrine models, which I'll go on to. And we wanted to show how they fitted into a wider culture of pilgrimage and to the wider setting of Canterbury. We wanted to show how the city had been shaped by the cult of Beckett. William Murray wrote a fantastic book on Canterbury under the Undering Kings. He mapped out the city in the 12th century. So we wanted to show the later medieval city so you could get an idea of what that looked like. And you can see, I mean, already around here, around the cathedral, this is the really thronged area. A lot of that is jewellers, a lot of that is pilgrim inns, especially down Burgate here, Check of the Hope. A lot of this is catering towards a pilgrim trade. And then further away from the cathedral down towards the south, you see areas that are, so this is 1450, areas that are gone a bit to rack and ruin, or they are just about recovering after the deprivations of the plague, the depopulation. What large areas, particularly here to the southeast, where there's not a huge amount, marshy ground and Greyfriars. We also wanted to show, because this is what Canterbury World Heritage Site were very keen on doing, and Canterbury BID, the Business Improvement District, was that there's more to Canterbury than the cathedral. So we've included St Augustine's here, we've included St Martin's out here, both parts of the World Heritage Site. So the model itself was driven by what we thought it would be, what we wanted it to be used for, or what people said it would be useful for. We also got things like the castle here. We've got, I can zoom in, by the way, because this is incredibly high definition. This is actually, I mean, we've got more high definition than this, but this is a 48 meg version, so you can zoom in pretty close. I mean, you can see the sort of level of detail once that sort of renders out. There we go. We've got Eastgate here, a blocked up old window, things like that. I mean, you can zoom in. You can pretty much get the graining on the wood on the doors on these if you had a high enough version, but I just got to choose this one. So because we were taking this to be something that was going to be useful, that helped us with a couple of things. Now, I mean, Amy was talking about how with illustrations, you don't have to be period specific. You don't have to show what is. You can show what the feel of something effectively. You can't really do that with digital modeling. If you want to make something that looks like this, you have to do everything at the same high res. You've got to do everything. I mean, I could talk about this for ages, and I'm not, but you have to also be very specific about when you're modeling and what you're modeling. Now, originally we were just going to do the top half of the city, really, that was going to be the camera angle, effectively there, because we didn't want to have to model the south of the city. There's not a huge amount known about it. But then it became clear that the castle was going to be a really important thing, and that we might as well model the whole lot. So the scope of it, we didn't do the suburbs. Obviously, they're very important. You've got to stop somewhere. We only had a certain amount of resource. We think we showed enough, effectively. The date, also very important. We wanted originally to do them the same date as the models of the shrine, but we couldn't really. Well, we started doing that, and unfortunately Canterbury is massively rebuilt in the mid-15th century, so all of the good evidence for the buildings are later than the shrine. So we just had to go with what the evidence gave us. I mean, in terms of creating this, it was basically a huge trawl through Canterbury Archaeological Trust, through back issues of Canterbury Archaeology, through the publications and everything, in order to see, what we could find. Oh, you can't see the model.
Yeah, sorry, John. Would you mind sharing your model screen? It might
so,
have to be a
okay.
different feature of the Zoom share screen, but
Fine. Sorry.
no, we're just so excited to see it. Sorry. This is
Okay. I was zooming about then, and I was. I got,
no,
yeah.
this is super. I mean, the Beckett story is great. So if it might be a thing of resharing screen, that tends to work for me if there's a hold up.
Okay.
Thanks.
Sorry about that. I'll stop sharing that, and I'll reshare the screen on this. Okay, sorry about that. I didn't realise that was the case. There we go. So that's the model. There we go. And so the things I was talking about in terms of detail, I assume you can see it now. Here's, for example, East Bridge. This is the high def I'm talking about. This little blocked up window. I can move north and show this little blocked up Roman doorway. Other details that I just think are really interesting that we just popped in. I mean, in order basically to give it a lived-in feeling, if we look down, here's the castle. Note the castle is in a state of some ruin. It is 1450s. The Roman brickwork down here. Put together from, I mean, this is a year of incredibly painstaking research. I mean, obviously we have some of it. But a lot of it, again, is actually, is filling in gaps. How confident can we be of maybe 50% of this model? Reasonably, 50% of it, I think we can be pretty certain. If, well, maybe 25%, we're pretty certain, 25% very confident, and 50% of it is, you know, filling in gaps. All the churches, you know, you have your hero buildings, the Cathedral, Blackfriars, Greyfriars. This, I just want to focus in on this one. This place here, this is the Parrot, which, if you actually compare it with the Parrot pub, is exactly properly framed. One of the things, again, this is slightly differently to the internal models that we did. One of the things we wanted to show was a city in a state of flux. So here it's a little bit of a conceit, but we've shown it's about the right time for Bell Harry and for the Martyrdom Chapel to be under construction. And also the sun. I mean, the inn sign is a little bit, again, of a conceit, but we've shown buildings under construction. We've also shown other buildings falling into disrepair. Here's the Church of St. John the Less, which had been abandoned about 20 years previously, stripped, and was later used as a barn. So I'm going to just move on to, I mean, you can ask questions about that if you like. I'm going to just move on to the internal models. Again, so back on the website, here's a lot of text. A lot of this is taken from my article on modelling the shrine. And we have these videos that we produced. Now, these were produced, to say, for Canterbury to help with visitor interpretation. They are, and we're going to check that. Excellent. They are there's a lot of ethical issues with digital modelling, as I said. And one of them is that you're effectively presenting something where everything is at the same resolution. Now, there's a thing you can do where you can present things you're being conjectural about as little grey boxes, or you can fade them out or something like that. But the problem with that is that to the lay eye, that then looks rubbish, quite frankly. It doesn't help with heritage engagement. It doesn't really help with interpretation, with visitor interpretation of these spaces. Rather fudgy approach to this was that if you're a professional historian, then you can look at something and say that's not right. Whereas, and in a sense, then it's doing its job as a research tool, because you can tell us why it's not right. Whereas if you are here, if you are looking to get an idea of the feel of a space, a medieval space, to try and make sense of the current space, then that doesn't matter so much. In fact, we don't feel that we're lying to people. When you're creating these models, we did, I just want to talk about the relationship between text and image here. These models, I'll just play this while I talk about it. So this is the shrine as it would have looked in 1408, is what we've gone for. When you're making a model, I put together all the as much secondary material as I could. I put together with my own original primary research. I went to the digital modelling team, which was, I should know, Anthony Masington, who's wonderful. You should follow him on Twitter. Jeff Arnott, Pat Gibbs, a few other people, like Jerome Rogers Blake, who did a lot of the animation. You go to them with an idea, your text, and you're saying, right, we're going to make an argument about what this looks like. This is our argument. They put it together and then they say this doesn't work, or you look at it and you go, well, that doesn't look right, and then you have to go away. So effectively the creation of the image becomes a feedback loop with the text, because every time you put something in and it doesn't look right, you go back to the text and you go, oh right, actually that's because that is wrong, or maybe I need to research this more. Why isn't this working? And then you show it to other people, and they say, you know, other experts, and they say, well, this doesn't look right. And then that's how the sort of the process works. You can't fudge anything with a digital model. If you're making a watercolor of the shrine, if you're making as previous shrine reconstructions, we'll do the shrine in isolation, say, but we're showing the whole thing. So you can't fudge things. You have to show everything. So you have to be you have to engage with everything. And I mean, just as a little point, the candles up here, there's evidence for those candles. I worked out how big all of those candles would be.
Thank you.
One of the things I want to show you as well, I'm going to share this because I've got a high definition version of it. Yeah, there we go. You can't see this on the video. The videos all have to be of a certain definition. There's a huge amount of material you don't even really get to see. And I want to zoom in here. So, I mean, I think the photorealism of this, that looks like gold to me. This looks like fabric. I mean, we put text on the miracle boards. You know, there is an attention to detail here. One of the things you can't see is that what we did was pin to the grills all these little votives and all these crutches. We wanted to get this idea of this being a shrine that you see through the evidence for the abilities of the saint. You're looking through the grills, you're looking through all these, and there's evidence for this happening at Cuthbert's Shrine at Durham. I mean, everything we've done because there's evidence for it. Okay, I mean, I'm going to, I can't work out what you're saying, what I'm not saying, but I'm going to go back to the cathedral. Okay. You can see there's a slightly different lighting setup here. I like this little glow on the inside. Lighting is one of these really difficult things. There's this little glow that gets reflected from the candles because this is gilt painted over with red. So it actually gives a particular glow to the shrine. The reflection onto the gold, up into the box and back down creates this. This was something we worked out by actually creating it in the model. You can do that sort of effect and see what would happen to the light. So this glow is actually something we worked out because we modeled it. And that's the kind of thing that doing these models can tell you about the text you're doing. As a historian, it's really sort of sobering to sort of have this idea of what things would look like. You try and do it, it just doesn't work. And then other things come out completely unexpectedly. So it's really, really worthwhile. I'm just going to whip through some of the others. This is a really good example. So this is the Corona Chapel. This is a fictionalized visit of a Countess of Kent. It's not real. It's the kind of thing that would happen, but we wanted to get an idea. So we're into here. These other ones, apart from the shrine. The shrine's very, very, very well researched. The other ones, for resource purposes, but also because there's just not really that much evidence. We tried to show different types of pilgrim behavior. Here is a very high status visit. Now, one of the things, again, you can't fudge about, we're trying to show typicality. One of the things you can't fudge is costume. There was an early version of this, as Emily knows, where they were all naked, but we couldn't keep that up. So this one, when you put people in costume, you have to be accurate to within a couple of years because costumes change so fast. We went for 1408 for a number of reasons, one of which is that it's close to Chaucer's time, which people could connect with. Again, there's an impact thing there. Another element of it was that it also means that the shrine is both not that cluttered up. We didn't have to model Henry IV's tomb, but also it does have the black print, so you get an idea of both things. Again, another thing that's more impressionistic, this mass at the martyrdom, which again, there's a primary source below which explains what's going on. So this is an interpretation of this primary text, talking about a dawn mass at the martyrdom where pilgrims are present. We put on bobble suits and green screen this. My colleague Louise Hampson is the priest, and she consecrated a roll of sellotape in that role. And finally, this is the tomb. We know very little about the tomb. There's almost no evidence really for what it looked like, apart from that floor, which we have excellent evidence for, these tile floors, and still a bit of it survives. One of the surprising things about the tomb is you've got these two pillars. If the tomb is here, you don't have much room to celebrate at this altar. We put together again, we thought this would be an area in 1408 where pilgrims might congregate to be ill in a liturgically unimportant space. But again, these, because although they look photorealistic or ish, they are just arguments. There are arguments about how the space could be used. And just to finish off, sorry, there's so much of this, and I'm just sort of whipping through it, but I'm still sort of running over time a bit. There's just to finish off, I'm going to link, because you can link to that, to my article on modelling the cult of Thomas Becket, where I do give I try to give all of the reasons for why we did these things, and that's very important, what we call paradata in the digital modelling trade. So this is the paradata, and it tells you why we did it. And as part of that, again, another output that I'm actually going to finish on, and that was inspired by Amy and her digital pilgrim, was that we put up the model of the shrine on Sketchfab. And I did actually run this past Amy. Hopefully this will load slightly quicker. I did actually run this past Amy because we put labels on it, and Amy is the master of these things. I did have one. Oh, there we go. Good. So yes, we've got the model, and you can zoom in as close as you like. There are literally hundreds of rings on this thing. We've not textured it, we've not coloured it, showed that it is conjectural, something we haven't done on the main models. We've also not coloured it, textured it, because to actually put all the textures on those hundreds of rings would take an unbelievable amount of time, and for it to load up would take even longer. And I seem to have crashed it. Good. Oh no, there we go. And on all of these, I've put these annotations. So again, the conjunction of image, text, primary source, in this case the badge that we base the shrine on, the appearance of the shrine, or little bits of surviving, what we're saying a surviving shrine. You can see that we've actually used that there, and similarly here, these shrine fragments here, we're saying are based on those, if this loads, that are in the Beanie Museum that were hauled out of the river in about 1983, or the riverbank in 1983, which we photogrammetried, and you are free to play around with at your leisure, and they can all be clicked through. So again, I mean, I'll just end it there, but and it's been a bit of a sort of manic ride through, I'm afraid, but what I wanted to show you was some of the ways in which we took all this material and we tried to do different outputs for different consumers, different audiences. They're all arguments about the original texts. They all help us to understand the original text, and actually in making them, they help us to understand the original text. So that's how this sort of, impact is a bit of a dirty word among historians sometimes, but actually, because we went into this impact layer, because we were trying to do things that would be helpful, that we knew would be helpful from the outset, it gave us a focus, which also meant that we looked at the material in a slightly different way than we would otherwise have done. It gave us that ability to focus on these things and to do these outputs and to view the material in different ways. So that process of creating the images was itself a research process that fed back into the material, and I'll leave it there.
Okay, that is fantastic, John. Virtual applause for our two wonderful speakers. This has been just such a delight, and I would invite everyone to, with questions, to put up their virtual hands now. And while you're doing that, so Amy and John, your visualization, so in Amy's case, through your hands and your eyes and your research, and in John's case, through your expansive expertise of these accounts about medieval Canterbury, you're making these histories and myths more accessible. And now is the time where that matters the most. But I think I'm not the only one who feels this way. You're not just returning us to the medieval world, you're giving it new life. And it's just so exciting to see what you guys have achieved. So on that note, I would like to invite our amazing participants to ask questions. And I'm looking to you guys to raise your hand. And if you cannot raise your hand, please could you message me in the chat? And I'll give you 2 more seconds. If not, I've got a question.
I've noticed David's niche question in the chat about.
Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, David, can we go ahead? Would you mind unmuting and asking that question for everyone? I would love that. Please, David.
It's a short answer.
Let's do that.
I have a general question for both people, but that niche one, sorry. I was looking and seeing on the left-hand side of those scripts. It was great to see the different scripts that you had there, but the first one looked as if you were presenting something which was 12th century. Was that the intention, and is there evidence for that?
No and no. It's no and no. One of the problems with modelling these things, it more pronounced actually in the Canterbury City model than it is in the Shrine model, is that I mean, as I say, it's a team effort, and every now and then one member of the team will take it on themselves to just do something they feel is necessary. So it was only after we'd rendered all that out and done everything that I noticed that I think Jeff presumably had just stuck in some text that he thought looked right, with the idea that no one would ever get close enough to see. But of course we can. So yeah, it's a little unfortunate that. I was trying not to hover on it for too long so you wouldn't, but yeah, no, it's more generally medievally. I don't think there'd be a 12th century text like that. I mean, the ones we were modelling those on were the tables of the Vicar's Choral at York, which are miracle boards and a life of St William. But they are early 15th century, I think. So.
Can I follow up on that?
Yes, go ahead.
Because there's a really interesting point there for you, John, but it's for both of you actually. I was struck, how both of you are doing public history and are doing the heritage without the industry, or perhaps to some extent there's there's certainly industrious element to it. But it's also a question. Originally, it was going to be a question to you about compromises that you feel are necessary in the process. And John, to some extent you touched on that. But actually, your response just then, and for both of you, is what discoveries have you made through the process? So actually, there isn't. It would be. It's not implausible that there could be a protogothic script there in the cathedral. But more generally, I'm just thinking, has it changed your perspective as scholars on what you're engaging with because of the creative element? Has the creative driven the scholarly?
Can I just hop in there and say, David, that was my question too. And I was going to quote John back to both of them. How is the creation of the image in a feedback loop changed your way of understanding what we do?
So I'll just jump in. I think I realized in doing this that I have been terrible at reading until I started making these pictures. Like just I have not paid attention. And I think that having this project of making the pictures that compelled me to read with purpose, and in the process of, I don't know, I was, for instance, spent a lot of time with Geoffrey Gaymar's History of the English, which I wouldn't have otherwise have done. And I was looking for some particular moments, but en route to those moments, was surprised and amazed by what I was reading, and so I found this as well when I was digitising the pilgrim souvenirs at the British Museum. Sometimes if you just turn off your theoretical brain and you just immerse yourself in primary sources, find any excuse, trick yourself, make it fun, do a Mary Poppins and snap the job's a game. And then suddenly you find that you've got ideas, and you read something in a scholarly article and you're like, no, that's wrong, because it happens also in this text. And so it's a great education. That's been the most obvious sort of positive scholarly element for me, is this excuse to read things that I might otherwise have skimmed through, or yeah, that's my answer.
I mean, for me, well, there's two parts of it for me. One is that when you're working, when I'm working with a team, when I have an idea and I'm saying, right, I want this, it should look like this. And so all the digital archaeologists I was working with have backgrounds in medieval archaeology, so they know what things are meant to look like in a way. But then they've also never done this before. So when we're looking at the model of Canterbury, they ask wonderful questions, which is sort of, you know, what do they all have chimneys? Well, you know, I'll find out. I'll go and find out. You know, what does this look like? You know, are there any examples? We spent forever trying to work out how the checker and the Hope roof fit together, because Canterbury Archaeological Trust's drawing had shown that it was a perfect square. And I mean, one of the things is, how do you get water drainage? That can't possibly work. Where do the pipes, where do the gutters go? All these sorts of things. In terms of a wider thing, though, for me, as a sort of thinking about pilgrimage, thinking about the management of cathedral sites, doing the shrine models really changed my view of how it actually sort of effectively created a thesis for me in a way. Because when you've got to model how pilgrims interact with a shrine, and you've got to do that in a way that is where you can actually show them doing it, it became very obvious very quickly that the shrine was far more sort of closed off, that it was far more managed than previous written descriptions had allowed. Because in a written description, you sort of get away with things where you can't get away with it if you're showing it. And then I took that and I looked at Durham Cathedral, and using what I'd thought about from making the models, that we actually in the end made a model of Durham as well, but making the model of Durham, looked at Durham and went, hold on, we're looking at the cathedral the entirely wrong way round. You know, the pilgrims never went through the cathedral, they went straight through the 9 altars. The shrine itself is a shrine platform. So looking at the way that, and this was in my article Becketization, a lot of it came out of the way we were looking at the shrines and the way we were modeling the shrines, then forced me to re-engage with a lot of other pilgrimage cults and go, oh, actually, no, cathedral space doesn't work like that in a sense. So yeah, I got a huge amount out of working with creating those models and working with the modelers, because people ask questions that you wouldn't otherwise ask when it's just written down.
That's excellent. Thanks, both. Just a reminder to use your raise hand feature. If it's not working for some reason, just drop your question in the chat. We do have a question for both of you, which has come through in the chat, and it reads, what restrictions did you and others put on your work due to the Christian focus? I imagine there are many sensitivities that have to be navigated.
That's a really good question. And to be honest, I want to answer this in relation to another project. I was writing the column on cathedral saints for Country Life, and illustrating that, and doing that within the auspices of a magazine like Country Life, knowing that there's a very Anglican readership. I felt as though I couldn't, for instance, flag up a moment in the life of St. Kentigern where he's wildly homophobic. But it's in the 12th century source, and it's kind of fascinating and a pretty like mad story. And there is a dog that really wants my attention right here. And so I think it's a tough one, and I think it's a bit like when we worked at the British Library and we were just the interns writing a blog post. You always made sure that there was a scholarly source you could defer. I know that Alison Ray will be nodding to this, you know, you'd say, it may be this, and here's the source I'm getting it from, if you disagree. And so in the same way, just using the medieval sources, not saying this is exactly what St. Kentigern did, but this is what Jocelyn of Furness said he did with all his biases as a 12th century hagiographer, means that you deflect it off, I think, a personal representation of the saint or an attack on belief, and more towards the particular set of interests of a medieval writer or context. And so, but it's a thing I'm negotiating still. And thank you, Charlie Fenton, for saying you love the dog. I'm sure he would love you.
Thanks, Amy. John, do you have a response to that question too?
Yes, I mean, well, so a huge amount of the work that I do with the Centre for the Study of Christianity and Culture, with Dias, is focused on working with the church in order to help the church understand its buildings, understand its historic practices, and sort of learn from the past very specifically. I mean, we're doing something at the moment on historic pandemics and current, pandemic, about how the Church of England can learn from the use of buildings, from its practice in the past. So, I mean, and I presented those models at Synod. I presented those models to the Guild of English Vergers. I presented them to the Association of England's Cathedrals and Cathedrals Plus and all sorts. We held a big, at the end of the Cathedrals Pilgrimage Project, we held a big workshop at Lambeth Palace. So we're presenting these to the church. To be honest, there were no restrictions put on those. I think in part because for the Church of England, that is such a distant past that when we could show the rough bits and they could laugh at it effectively, and they could take the good bits and laugh at the bad bits. It's effectively, how can we sort of show how the building was used without necessarily, we're obviously not going to do the Catholic bits. I have worked with Roman Catholic Westminster Cathedral. That was much harder because it's much more recent. So a lot of the stuff is in living memory. There you do have to be very, very careful about how you approach the last 100 years of belief and practice, because it's changed so much. That you do actually have to be very, very careful and put restrictions on yourself. But for me, I found that working on pilgrimage, cathedrals tended to just really... They wanted to get at the depth, the experience, the sensation, the relationality of it that it provided. And what we were trying to do is say, okay, this has the trappings of Roman Catholicism, but actually we can strip away the medieval. We can strip away some of the medievalism. We can leave some of it, but we can drill down and try and get back at creating that experience. And the only way to do that is by showing it in the round. We didn't really feel there was anything too toxic, to be honest, in the medieval stuff. I say the more recent stuff, much more the case, but not for the medieval.
Okay, that's very interesting and helpful. Thank you. I still can't see anyone's hands up, but that's perhaps because there might be a glitch with Zoom. I'm going to switch to gallery view just in case anyone is trying to ask a question and can't. If not, can someone put a question in the chat? That might be the easiest thing if our hand feature is not working. Let's just have a look. Oh, Rory, yes, please. Oh, that'd be fun. And then Noah. Over to you, Rory, and then Noah. Please unmute and go for it.
Thanks, Emily, and thanks to John and Amy for their presentations this evening. My question is to John. I'm just wondering about the timeline with a project that involves modeling. What were your first steps in terms of putting together a project like this? When did you involve those who could produce the modeling? And what was the nature of the collaboration that you had with the modelers in terms of producing what you did, which is so impressive?
Thanks. Yeah, so, I mean, actually for all of it, it was baked in pretty much from the start. The Centre for the Study of Christianity and Culture has quite a long history of doing these models. did Holy Trinity Micklegate, did Worcester Cathedral. We've done various things, did Glastonbury Abbey. I wasn't involved on those, but when I came into the project in 2014, it had been baked into the funding bid that we would do this. So the modelling team was already in place. So right from the start, we were looking at, I mean, there were other models that the centre works on as well. So as far as the modelers were concerned, I think depending on which of the modelers, we had a team of 3, and then we got in one extra sort of consultant to work on the animation, because we hadn't done figure animation before to that level. So for them, it was sort of half-time, and they were working half-time on another project. So they always had things to do while we were getting up to speed. But it meant that from the start, so with the Canterbury models, those shrine models, the idea was that we were just going to model pilgrim behaviour in the cathedral, which is a very large brief. We thought that the Worcester Cathedral model is somewhere. I think it's on the Pilgrimage Cathedrals. Oh no, it's on the Christianity and Culture website somewhere. You'd have to look for it. But what actually is that? So from the start, we're saying, right, what are we going to model? How much are we going to model? And we ended up modelling the 4 sites, because it became quite clear to me early in the research that the idea that pilgrims went from one site to the other, we know there's 4 Beckett stations, that's all in all the literature. The idea that pilgrims went from one station to the other in order had actually been massively overstated. There wasn't a good deal of evidence for it before Erasmus. So instead, what we thought was we could use these 4 sites, and they actually provide different pilgrim experiences. So we'll model the different pilgrim experiences. And then, we then photographed the whole place, got the ground maps, built them from that. Then once we sort of rendered out the blocks, actually me and Eamon Duffy sat down with just a printout and drew all over it. Saying, oh, well, there needs to be something here, there needs to be more clutter, more clutter, more clutter. And we just filled it all in, and then we gave that to the model and said to do that. And then they came back, and then we tweaked it, and we showed it to people, to Emily and other people like that, and people giving us feedback all the way through. That took us about 3 years. The city model took us a year, and that was at half time. And that was because we were already sort of going, we'd already sort of done the research. And for that, we took the city, we blocked out into blocks every little bit. And then I just went through and I tried to find out as much as I could about each block. Then we did all the hero buildings, we tried to find as much as we could each block, and then we just built it from the bottom up. We built it from the south to the north, and we just went up. And there were 3 modelers working on that, and we basically just filled them out. But so I was doing the research, and then as we were hitting the blocks and modeling them, I was in the room. So we're all in the same room together. So it's very reflexive. It's so hard to actually write down the process because so much of it was verbal, which is really bad. Like the London Charter is not, went out the window a little bit, but it always does with these things. The London Charter is there to be torn up. In a way, you can't possibly adhere to it. So yeah, we would effectively just batting questions off each other and sitting on each other's laps and working on each other's models to just try and get it, because we were so short of time as well. That effectively took 6 months, that model, which I still don't know how we did it, but we'd love to do another one. We would really love to do York. I'm going to be talking about that to the Department of History next week, actually, about whether we can do York. But yeah, that's basically what we did. It was frantic and it was on top of each other, but it was basically a really coherent team with the modelling and the research going hand in hand all the way through.
Thanks, John, and thanks for that wonderful question, Rory, and Godspeed with York. I'm going to hand over to Noah, and then we've got a question from Dr. Alison Ray and Lucy Splorn. So first to Noah.
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Yeah, just absolutely. I was really looking forward to this, and it did not disappoint on both counts. I have a question for both speakers, and it comes back to this idea of kind of medievalism and effective medievalism and outreach. For Amy's project, we had Neil Gaiman over the other week, and he has made a career out of kind of medievalism and kind of all of these kind of stories and stuff. And for John, a lot of the renderings you were showing struck me like stuff straight out of a video game. And this idea kind of Ubisoft giving Notre Dame digital renderings they did of the roof in the wake of the fire and all these things. And so my kind of question for both speakers is, given both of these projects you discussed, what would your kind of dream project look like in terms of kind of effective outreach? And then to follow that up, what what necessary work, if you could do any project, what is the kind of work in these two respective fields kind of reaching people outside of the way historians kind of normally do? What kind of work do you want to see kind of being done? Just a phenomenal job on both counts. Thank you so much.
Wow. I think, so breaking down the question is a really interesting question. What would I like to do was, I think, in an ideal world. Right now, it's exactly what's happening. I just love it, and I'm really enjoying coming up with future projects. And I feel like I don't want to go too far ahead, because it's a very, when you've been used to publishing for a academic readership, you still have to adapt your whole mindset. And I'm learning so much from editors at the moment, and other writers, about how you kind of spot those things that will be really good for a general audience. And one of the things I've noticed is it's those moments in your research that make your heart leap, but you can't publish an article on, an academic one. It's those moments where you just go, oh, I wish I could tell someone. And so it's like I feel as though as I learn more how to notice those moments and how to gather them up and have a little inventory of them, I'll be able to think of other projects. I think it's true, that will be the same for anyone. What was the second bit of the question? What do you want to see? What do we want to see being done in the industry generally?
Yeah, what kind of work do you think kind of, and I guess this kind of ties into the best of all possible worlds, but what direction would you kind of want to see this kind of being taken?
Now, I think I that it is good and proper that there is a place for academic writing, and there is a place for more general writing, and that there is such a thing as a kind of creative ways of engaging with materials and the sort of the one for the academy. But I think there is a little bit of stigma around about being interested in exploring your primary sources in a way that isn't strictly academic. And I know that I spent a year feeling guilty that I was doing these prints and not really telling anyone. And I know for a fact that there are loads of people who are doing stuff on the side and have little side hustles. And I think that what would be really nice to see going forward, especially as universities are an interesting place at the moment, and we all have to think creatively about how we market our skills as academics, that it would be really celebrated and encouraged that students take up sideline projects that do funky things to enliven their engagement with the primary source material.
Well, I was actually just looking around because from my point of view, there's a book recently come out by Catherine Clark called Medieval Cityscapes, which is fantastic, and everyone should read. It's only about 60 pages long. I reviewed it for Urban History, where she talks about 4 different projects: one at Rouen, one at Swansea, one at Chester. She was involved with. She led the ones on Swansea and Chester, about how you look at medieval cities, how you interpret medieval city, whether they're through walking trails, whether they're through projections on ruins, whether they're through a Rouen. They did a panopticon that's a little bit like a Canterbury one. But this idea, like Amy says, there's a sort of academic writing and non-academic writing. So when we're doing the models, there's a sort of snobbery, not snobbery. There's a sort of a knee-jerk academic-y about it. That well, that's not quite right. That's not quite, which is good. This is great. If we can do the models and people say that's not quite right, then wonderful, because it means that they are making you think about that again. Tell us why they're not right. That's history. That is the historiographical process, as far as I'm concerned. But that engagement, these cityscapes, city interactions are a really good way to get people to engage with history and these kind of models. Now, one of the things we notice when we show these. One thing I noticed when I talked to the Telegraph about them as well was that people get really excited about the idea of gamifying them. How can we play with this? How can we get that model? Now, with that model of Canterbury, we can drop it into a game engine, wait about a week, and then we can start running around it. The frame rate's abysmal, and we can't really do anything. You run through walls because we didn't make any of them solid, but you can actually do that. There's a point at which we could probably, somewhere down the line, you could have that on your phone, wander around Canterbury, look at it, look at something on your phone, and it would show you our model, what it would look like. Possibly, hopefully, we're looking at that. But it's all, a lot of this is heavily resource based. But you know, how can we need to get resource for this if we could do it? But I think gamifying, even if it's not using high definition digital models, even if you're just using, again, Catherine Clark talks about a game they made for Swansea based upon The Hanged Man, William Craig, where you play this game to try and piece together the history of William Craig. And it's all sort of cartoony, but this is how you get people involved. You create things that, I've often seen this in cathedrals, when you create a trail, like where you need to find things in the cathedral and it's for kids, the adults will do it with the kids and they'll really enjoy it. Because adults love doing that. People love finding stuff. They don't love being told where stuff is. They love finding stuff. They love playing the game. But we feel that only kids can really do this. But fun treasure trails. Adults love treasure trails. We did pilgrimage experience days. They love doing that. So I think that's that idea of just gamifying things, making things playful and fun is how you do that. And I'd love to gamify some of the digital models. In terms of what I'd really like to do, though, this is my project for York, if I could do it. It's basically layers of York. We've got, Centre for Medieval Studies, we've got a great archaeology department. You do Roman York, you do Viking York, you do medieval York, you do Georgian York, you digitize the whole thing, you get every single department involved. You get the English department, the art department, the history of art department, everyone, digital modeling. You make the digital models and everyone does the research. And when you've got a bit of research and you want to plug it onto that, you get a literary description. The English department can come in and you can put a little tag on it. And the English, everyone can tag their local research, their history research. I'd love to do it with Canterbury too, but that you can plug it onto a layer, and then it effectively becomes like an interdepartmental, multidisciplinary piece of research that people can play with. And it's instant impact. Hey, would you like to do some impact? We've already got this massive, great, digital model. People love it. Stick it on that. There's so much that you could do if you integrated all that. There's so much work at York being done on the mystery plays already. Plug it into a digital map. I would love to have a digital layers of York properly as our Canterbury one, but for each layer of history, showing how the city changes and everything just plugs into that. That would be absolutely wonderful. But I mean, getting everyone together and getting the funding is the problem. Again, I will be trying to sell this to the department next week, but I've been trying to sell it to the department for about 4 years.
Holy cow, we all, oh yeah, Amy, go for it. Yeah.
I didn't really finish my answer, which was the how that would translate into public engagement. And I think if we can, if as a scholarly community, we could really capitalize on rigor and delight in equal measure. So it's like, what John was saying about, yes, get the research right, but then, also learn to communicate the kind of wonder that you feel when you're engaging with these sources. Then that would be, for me, I just think if that was more of a culture, and I think it is at MEMS, then that would be a really positive outcome in the future.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks for a brilliant question, Noah. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Alison Ray and Lucy Splar now and just remind everyone that we will keep the Zoom room open if anyone just wants to sort of digest how great this talk was. But over to you guys, Alison and Lucy. Question.
Right, so just want to say thank you so much to both of you. That was so much fun. It's so great to see your faces again. And the question is for Amy to say, because I love so much your amazing artistic skills and how you make things. And we just want to know more about your techniques in printmaking, because I loved absolutely one of my favorite things coming into the British Library was when you would basically show up and you're like, oh, I made a model of the manuscript, the Edgerton manuscript, just to understand it a bit better. And so that was just absolutely incredible. So I'd just love to know more about your artistic techniques and if you learned anything historic from the process.
Yeah, thank you. It's really kind. Well, I think I was drawn to linocut because it's one of those media that is at once very medieval looking and very modernist looking. Like it can evoke kind of early 20th century British art and the early woodcuts in Wynkyn de Wyrder or Caxton. It's just and so I suppose the technique. Do you want to know about the technique of linocut specifically? So I met a man. Basically, I realized at like 5 in the morning in November 2018 that I needed professional help with lino cut. Like I was using the Easy Carve tools and like Easy Carve lino and the red handled tools that you can get in like anywhere, and they're fine. But it was just, I was just doing a kind of bad job, and I was like, I just need, and there must be, I live in a very artsy town, so I was like, there must be someone here that teaches it. So I was lying in bed Googling this at 5 in the morning and found a guy called Chris Pigg, who has a studio called the Black Pig Printmaking Studio. And I emailed him being like, I need professional help. And he emailed back 10 minutes later being like, you've come to the right place. And I went there that day, and he basically showed me the inks, best lino. He's got like 35 years experience and exactly what to use. And he's such a technical, I mean, he's a brilliant artist, but he really gets the materials. And so I think, you know, he has a, you know, so then I became a key holder at the studio and sort of learned how to use all the various things. So you have your lino block, you make your sketch on it, obviously it's in mirror image. You then carve, it's a case of drawing in light, largely. So it's a lovely way of thinking. You start looking, when you walk down the street, a bit like if you've got really tuned in to doing Instagram posts, you start seeing everything for Instagram. Like in the same way, once you start doing relief printmaking, you look around and you see light everywhere, like how it's falling on leaves, how it's reflected in a window. And so I started, sorry, my dog's just, get out. You just farted, I'm so sorry, it wasn't me. Get out, Spring. I think this is why he's been wanting my attention. Okay, anyway. So yes, then you carve the block, you take out, everywhere that you carve away will be white on the print, and then you ink it up. You lay paper over the top and you run it through the press, and then you peel the paper off like I showed you in the video. But I think that brazen exploitation of teachers has been the kind of awakening in this process for me. And I like totally blame Chris. And it was just great that he was there ready to teach and be so mad and inspirational. And we'll all have people like that in our lives. So I owe the technique side of things to him.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Amy. We've got a few more questions, and then again, we'll keep it sort of formal. We'll pretend we're in a space together having drinks. I'd like to hand over to Nikos, and then I'd like to hand over to Peter, and then we'll just have an informal chat. So Nikos, over to you.
Thank you, Emily. This is a very bad connection. I hope that you can all hear me. This is a very bad connection. I hope that you can all hear me. I had a question for John. I had a look at the model that you're showing. One thing, and I was trying to find areas of Canterbury that I'm familiar with. And one that I couldn't find, but it may be my omission, is St. Margaret's. But maybe my omission, but actually that prompted something that may be interesting for you, because you want to recreate the pilgrim's experience in Canterbury, isn't it? And from records we know that pilgrims did not only go to Canterbury Cathedral, but also visited other churches. And one of the key churches was St. Margaret's, which was actually on the road leading to the cathedral. So that's a very, very important church for the pilgrim's point of view. Now, as far as I knew, I think the first phase must be around 13th century, so well within your span, the time you're constructing the city. So, is this something a church? Should it be there? If not, if yes, why? If not, why? That was there. And then, what was the role of these churches in the pilgrim's experience of the city?
Yes. Right. Well, I'll preface this by saying one of the beautiful things about digital models, as opposed to a drawing, as opposed to a reconstruction drawing, is that with digital models you can change them. You can take them from different angles. You can add things and take things away. One of the bad things about them is that they just do weird things sometimes, and when you've got 1,000 buildings and they're all individually modeled and a lot of them are on different layers or something like that, that when you render something out, every now and then one of them disappears. We did know that there was a version of the model out there, where St Margaret's had disappeared for some reason. I hadn't realised it was the one that I was showing. Is it not? Is it the one on the website? Because yeah, there's a model. There's a version out there that has St Margaret's just as a patch of dirt, because for some reason it just decided not to be on that version. You have to check everyone so carefully because they just glitch for some reason. In terms of the importance of the churches, absolutely. That is one of the things we wanted to show about the city. One of our partners was Eastbridge, the Eastbridge Hospital, because it's there. It's so much medieval architecture there. It's a beautiful space. It's so important for pilgrims. You've got Maynard's Hospital as well. We wanted to show the Maynard's Hospital, as we think we got some reasonably good evidence for what it looks like before it's rebuilding, but also absolutely all the churches and the entranceways and everything. We would have loved to have carried on outside the city, go out to St Dunstan's, but I mean we had to stop it somewhere. One of the things about that map at the moment as it stands, so we've put it on the website, and you can see it's doing a particular job on the website, which is to show that sort of pilgrim route really, but it's there. It needs more doing to it. It needs more interpretation. It needs to be put into different contexts. We've created it. We only finished creating it like a year ago, and we haven't really had the time because the Beckett 2020 thing overtook us. But actually, what we do and how we contextualize and how we interpret that model is something that we need to carry on discussing with the World Heritage Site, with BID, to really drive home that point that there's more to Canterbury than the cathedral. There's more to Canterbury pilgrimage than the cathedral. Beckett's influence on the whole city is so important, and also all these bits that you can go and see as well. You can go to the castle. I mean, we showed the castle in a state of disrepair and that sort of thing. We wanted to show again, like the walls. I mean, all of these things. We tried to show them all accurately so that you can go and. But again, that is one of the things we need to do going forward with our partners. The problem is that you sink so much resource into making these things that you then run out of resource to do anything with them. So that's the bare truth of it. But yeah, the St Margaret thing is very aware. I'm very aware that could be a problem. I'm annoyed that it came up because I thought I was using a clean one, but I obviously.
You're aware of this, so it's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikos. Thank you, John. I've got one last comment from Peter, Dr. Peter Good, and then we're going to do the informal pretend drinks post-seminar chat if anyone wants to stay. But over to you, Peter.
You didn't use my middle name, so I'll my full title. Firstly, just thank you very much for these really fascinating talks. That was absolutely sort of brilliant view on what you do, which is is amazing. I was going to just to have a recommendation to follow on that there's a very good Instagram account called Popeye and Curly, which is based very loosely off tales of medieval Baghdad, and they're sort of silly, jokey views of tales from medieval Baghdad. So yeah, that's another sort of form of art, artwork. But yeah, I kind of wanted to pick up on Amy, what you were saying about this almost intellectual snobbery about what it means to be doing stuff as a proper historian or whatever, and I'm slightly not surprised and yet slightly dismayed to find that you sort of feel that is an issue, that you're not because you're doing what you're doing, that's not proper. Proper history or a proper reading of sources or something. I find that sort of quite dismaying, really. So I'm very glad you're doing it, frankly. But also, do you sort of see any way forward with how these and so certainly John has sort of talked about what more you can do with with these sort of digital modeling, etc. What do you see as the sort of next step in the sort of more literary or artistic turn in sort of using our historical sources? Do you have any views to that?
Okay, so to address the first thing, I don't have a iota of shame now. I think it was more towards the end of the PhD when I felt like I ought really to be working, which I probably should have been. And I was like waking up and just running to the studio, getting 30 quid out the wall to pay the studio thing, and taking prints so I could get back and do and write like I should have been. And probably I suppose that I never experienced any kind of direct sort of criticism of what I was doing from anyone that I was being taught by or anyone in academia. It was a more internalized thing. And I feel as though I see it in other students. They're like, oh, and by the way, I've been doing this thing, like no, show me, that's great, you know. And I wonder whether it's not common for teachers to suggest a creative way of engaging with sources as a kind of, well, if you're home for the holidays, you know, what if you do this? I had a friend who had the most amazing Old English board game she had made for our Old English exams, and it never came out in the classroom, and that's such a shame. And I hope that if I were teaching Old English, which I probably never will, because, you know, it's not my thing, but that if my students had made this incredible board game where you had to like slide down dragons and whatever, and then parse verbs, and they were, you know, ordered difficult, medium, easy, or whatever, that it would be out there in the middle of the classroom, we'd all be playing it. So I think I maybe overstated that. I just don't want, if there's anyone in the audience who's maybe completing their PhD or in their second year, or kind of really hoping, or really has got this idea but is suppressing it because they feel like they should be being a proper historian and not doing, just to forget that and indulge, because it's really useful and interesting and inspiring. Yes, and then the second bit was where I see artists. Can you repeat the last bit, please?
Yeah, sure. So you, I'm gratified to hear that you didn't experience that externally. You know, the inner battle is sometimes the hardest, right? And the second thing is, what do you see as being a sort of a way forward is using, in using sort of art and artwork on this more artistic turn, if you like, or approach in the future of the way that we study and the way that we do history, if you like.
Well, I'm an art historian, so I was always using images. But in terms of how we do that as historians and as art historians, I think talk to more artists. Every artist that I know is an art historian. You go into their computers or you go into their studios, and there is stuff on the walls from cave art through to modernism, through to, it's just. And the Courtauld has been doing a program called Material Witness for a while, which takes students to work on with particular media. And I think that's so fruitful, because it's not just the opportunity to use materials and understand techniques better, but it's an opportunity to talk to the practitioners. And so I think opening up conversations between artists, practitioners, and art historians would be a really fruitful way of educating us and enhancing our technical knowledge of the material we study. I think John's got something to add.
Yeah, could I jump in on that as well?
Yeah.
One of the, I was actually sort of saying this to Emily before before everyone came on, but one of the things that has arisen as one of the London Beckett 2020 things that's come about is this pageant play that so in 1519 the Skinner's Company put on a pageant of Thomas Becket, and it was the typical pageant wagons, the story of Beckett's birth to the story of Beckett's parents meeting as a crusader and a Middle Eastern princess, the story of the falling out, the story of the martyrdom, so these three wagons. We only know it exists because of the accounts of what they were paid for. We know that it was on Midsummer. There's a Midsummer Watch. So we've got a reasonable amount of detail about the stuff. Actually, it's the same kind of level of detail as Canterbury has for its Midsummer Watch. It's Eve the Translation, which Sheila Swedenborg's written about pageants of the early 16th century. But Emmeline Winterbottom, who was formerly the master of the Skinners and has a background, a long career in the theatre as a producer, playwright, got very excited about this and wanted to try and recreate it, but not as a sort of. So, I mean, York Mystery Plays, for example, they've done, 3 iterations of those. They're wonderful, but we've got the texts. They're based on original texts, and it's how you interpret those. You get other ones. I mean, the Canterbury Medieval Pageant, as it stands, it's more to the fun, very much more to the fun end, really. But here's something that's in the middle, because what Emmeline wanted to do was tell that Beckett story in the way, using the same kind of ideas, the evidence that they had from the accounts, the evidence that they had from late medieval sources of the kinds of things, the way that would have been told, and then reinterpreting that, hitting those details accurately as they can, but reinterpreting it because for a modern audience, because that's what effectively they were doing with the Beckett story. They were reinterpreting a 12th century story for a 15th century, 16th century audience. So she's taking that and reinterpreting it for a 21st century audience. So I got the script last week. I script edited it. I was consulted on it to make it hit the sort of historical accuracies. So it's a sort of composite 12th century, 16th century, 21st century play. It involves local schools. It's going to be open air, Bow Churchyard, midsummer on the right day. It'll be accompanied by the various guilds of London selling their wares as they would have. So that mixture, that admixture of accuracy, updating, bringing in the sort of local schools. There's the creativity of creating new song for it, but songs based upon medieval melodies, medieval lines, medieval ideas. That creativity where we're not, I think as historians, that if you can get involved in that at a really early stage and say, look, actually we can bring something to this, like you want that sort of medieval authenticity. The idea of authenticity is so hot topic, hot button right now. People love authenticity, whether they're going on pilgrimage or they're viewing thing. They love to feel that it's real. So if you can come in at the earlier stage and say, you can write something creative, but I will be there. I can provide you with materials to build on, to create something that is both ancient and modern. Then I think that's a really good way of. And I think these new sort of I don't think there's anything really anything like this before, but I think it's the kind of thing that could actually kick off a new idea of that sort of late medieval pageant play, that sort of open air entertainment with Alex's Giants, because there's going to be giants in it, because there are always giants and people love giants. I mean, so they're actually combining those really fun elements of late medieval drama in a modern setting and hitting those authentic bits. I think that's a way of synthesizing all that as well.
Well, that's really wonderful, and thank you, Peter, for bringing that up. What's going to happen now is we want to let anyone who's hungry or thirsty go away, but before you do that, please know that we will keep the Zoom open as if we were in the Parrot or the Dolphin, and one day we can take John and Amy to those places via MEMS. But before we say thank you so much, you can stay here, but can we just give them a sort of emoji clap? It's so weird on Zoom, but your papers have been such an inspiration. I literally have 29 private messages that have just said how, to quote from one of my students, how heartening that was. If you guys need to get dinner or relax, please do that, but I'm going to keep the Zoom room open. And can I ask all of our participants who want to keep chatting about Amy's amazing work and John's amazing work to turn on your videos? I'll stop recording, but this has just been so wonderful. And again, to quote my student, heartening. Thank you, John and Amy. That was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you, Mem.
That was great. That was great.